The Rohirrim had increased since the days of Falkwyne, and before the attacks of Saruman, a full muster would probably have produced many more than 12,000 riders. That is a direct quotation from the Unfinished Tales, and you would be safe to assume that 12,000 riders is the maximum strength of the Rohirric army during the War of the Ring. But I'm going to be paying close attention to the word probably. And let's have a dive through some of the numbers just to figure out how many soldiers Rohan really would have had during the War of the Ring. Okay? Hello everybody, and welcome to the channel. This is Gone with Gandalf, and every single Friday, apart from last Friday, sorry about that, I make these lore videos where I speculate about some lore, talk about some stuff. It's pretty cool. If you like these kinds of videos, then do like and subscribe, and Right then, well, let's begin with that quotation that I started the video off. The Rohirrim had increased since the days of Falkwyne. Who is Falkwyne? Well, Falkwyne, he is Theoden's great-grandfather, and he was the one who reconquered the West March. But sadly, his twin sons, Fastred and Falkred, both died fighting alongside Gondor against Harad in Ithilien in the year 2885. So this is 130 years or so prior to the War of the Ring, and so from that point where they, would have had severe casualties in direct battle, they have therefore increased in number. Okay, let's move on. And before the attacks of Saruman, a full muster would probably have produced many more than 12,000 riders. Okay, so it is also said in the Unfinished Tales just here that an Ered has 120 horsemen, riders, soldiers of Rohan, and a full muster is called an Ered. And an Ered has 100 Ereds. Okay, so simple maths, 100 times 120 gives you 12,000. So that is where that number comes from for the full muster and Ered, and that is what it is describing here in this quotation. But it does say prior to the attacks, or before the attacks of Saruman, a full muster would probably have produced more. Many more. I'll get onto that in just a moment. So, when did Saruman's attacks actually begin? Well, his outright war against Rohan began on the 25th of February 3019 of the Third Age. And this is when you had the first battle at the fords of the Isen. And to put this into perspective, into the timeline of the Lord of the Rings, this is when the Fellowship passed the Argonath, therefore a day before the fall of Boromir and the abduction of Merry and Pippin. I was thinking, just as a side note, there's going to be a separate video later on kind of the secret plans of Saruman regarding this event, where of course he sent some forces over there to try and recover the One Ring for himself. But that is for a separate video. Saruman's war did go on, as you then also had the fords of the Isen, the second battle rather, on the 2nd of March, so about a week later. And then you had, of course, the Battle of the Hornburg, also known as Helm's Deep, which began on the 3rd of March. Well, let's go through some of the numbers. Some of these numbers are going to be very sketchy. There's a certain amount of error, quite a lot of it, because they are largely unknown. But the first battle at the fords of the Isen, about 2,000 Rohirrim were there, maybe a bit extra, but hundreds would have died. It was a victory, but it was kind of a Pyrrhic victory, especially when you consider that Theoden's only son and his heir, Theodred, died in this very first assault against a similar-sized force of Isengard, 2,000 there or thereabouts. The second battle, a few days later, that again was said to have had about 2,000 Rohirrim. Now, this was up against 10,000 plus of Isengard, and this would be the army that would then march on to the Hornburg, Helm's Deep. So they suffered heavy casualties. I'll get on to the exact number in just a moment, because it segues quite nicely into Helm's Deep. Now, at Helm's Deep, you already had 1,000 men as the garrison under the command of Gamling now. Then you had the 1,000 men from Edoras that came with Théoden, and then they looked and they were like, okay, let's go into Helm's Deep and bolster that force. So you've got 2,000 men in there. And then, of course, the battle joins. The 10,000 Uruk-hai go in, and the battle is there. During this time, you have Gandalf that goes and musters the men from the second battle of the Fords of the Isen. There were 2,000 to begin with. He manages to gather 1,000 men under the command of Erkenbrand, who was there at the second battle. So it's safe to say that perhaps 1,000 died at the second battle, or just, you know, casualties. Lost, some were dead, some just couldn't fight anymore, but 1,000 were gathered and then came as reinforcement to Helm's Deep. So 3,000 Rohirrim all in all. The casualties again for this battle are very, very vague, but heavy casualties are to be expected. It was a big battle, perhaps a third, so 1,000 cut off from there. But to kind of reinforce this figure, let's compare it with the Battle of the Pelennor Fields, because of course we know that 6,000 riders did make it to that battle, and following that battle, less than 4,000 riders were still able to fight. So again, you've got a third of the total force being the casualties. So I could, you know, say that perhaps that's a reasonable figure there. Now, I know that there's a lot of figures here, but I'll get to it at the end. We'll have a summary. So bear with me for just a bit longer. Théoden did say that he could take 10,000 riders from Rohan to the aid of Gondor, if there was a need for this. Of course, there was a great need for this. However, with everything that had happened before, days earlier, you had those scuffles with Saruman. Of course, as we said at the beginning, they could have had many more than 12,000 riders before that. Now it's only 10,000. But there's other things to consider, because of course Mordor at this point, they're spilling over into the Eastfold. They're attacking some of those most eastern regions of Rohan, of course, just coming over the Anduin, nipping over, having a cheeky holiday, perhaps stealing a couple of horses or just hamstringing them, I don't know. You know, Rohan is a very large area. Even with a horse, it's going to take you a while to get over to Dunharrow and get to the full muster. So due to the time constraints as well, because Minas Tirith is about to fall, and Mordor coming out of the east to threaten the border, Théoden is not going to take 10,000 riders. And so you get the 6,000 riding to the aid of Gondor, just in the nick of time. Let's get on to some of those figures then. In the first Battle of the Isen, that 2,000 plus force, you would have had, let's say, casualties of like 750. The second battle, where they got absolutely annihilated, to be honest, half of that number probably did get wiped out. That's minus 1,000. And then at Helm's Deep, we already covered that, minus 1,000 again. So all in all, in these scuffles with Saruman in the war with Isengard, that is about 2,750 that you've already taken as a casualty. So therefore, if you had 12,000 riders base and you've taken 2,750 casualties or deaths, that would require an heir, remember that is the full muster, of 12,750. We can easily round that up to 13,000 because, again, we don't know the number. If we get into significant figures, 13,000 is a much better estimate than using 4 significant figures of 12,750. And let's kind of dive a bit more into the semantics. When you say many more than 12,000, do you consider 1,000 extra on 12,000 to be many more? That is less than 10%. Many more, I'd say that would push that figure to at least 13,500 as the full muster prior to the attacks of Saruman. But bear with me, because that is only the first part of this video, and if we just bring all of those figures back round, you had the 6 riders at the Pelennor, they get cut down to 3,500. Okay, so that's minus 2,500 right there. Then you had about 3,000 Rohirrim at the Black Gate. Again, that is a big battle. It's said to be very large casualties. When you're that outnumbered, a third of your number as casualties is not outlandish. So minus 1,000 there. So of the 6,000 riders that came to the aid of Gondor, you've got minus 1,000, minus 2,050. You've only got 2,500 riders left. So let's have a look at those total figures with this in mind. 13,500 of the Eorhir, the full muster of Rohan prior to the attacks of Saruman. You lost 3,500 at the combined battles of the Pelennor and the Black Gate, and a further 2,750 or thereabouts against Isengard. So now you're down to 7,250 with that in mind. So your Eorhir has lost near half of its strength at this point. And that is assuming there are no casualties from those orcs that are crossing over the Anduin north of Caer Andros, coming into the Eastfold. You know, that is why you had 4,000 or so men left behind to guard the settlements of Rohan. So let's say 7,000 Rohirrim at the end of the War of the Ring. That is 7,000 combined for those that are in Rohan guarding the borders. And that pool of soldiers are the same ones that then would ride out with Eomer and Aragorn as they kind of went into Rhûn to subdue those clansmen out there, which is very interesting. It would honestly be pretty cool if they made a video series about that. I understand that's not going to happen for the Amazon series because they are not allowed to do that, but it would be pretty cool. Okay, there you have it. A much more long-winded answer than you were perhaps going to be hoping for, but I hope that it has been interesting regardless, and thank you for watching. I am going with Gandalf. Good day. The Battle of the Pelennor. Okay, let's start again. Cross